I need to tell you something that happened to me 19 days ago that's going to sound absolutely impossible, but I swear on everything I hold sacred that every word is true. I was sitting alone on a rooftop prayer garden in Jerusalem at dawn, completely mesmerized by wondering what angels actually do during their eternal existence, when Jesus appeared beside me and revealed his fascinating answer about the daily activities of angels that will blow your mind and transform everything you think you know about these heavenly beings and their incredible involvement in human life. What he showed me didn't just satisfy my curiosity about angelic existence. It completely revolutionized my understanding of the spiritual realm operating all around us and gave me insights about the constant angelic activity happening in our lives that are more fascinating than anything I'd ever imagined, about these messengers of God and their ceaseless work on behalf of humanity. But before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps give me the strength to speak my truth. Now, let's get into my story. I'm recording this from a quiet corner table at a cafe in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem's Old City, where I'm taking a break between meetings with local religious leaders about faith and interfaith dialogue. It's a beautiful Thursday morning, and I'm sitting near an ancient stone wall that's been witness to thousands of years of human prayer and divine encounter, watching Orthodox Jews hurry to morning prayers while Christian pilgrims explore the narrow cobblestone streets. The Jerusalem air carries the scent of fresh bread from nearby bakeries and the distant sound of church bells mingling with calls to prayer. And there's something about being in this holy city where heaven and earth seem to touch that makes you wonder about the invisible spiritual realm operating all around us. I should be reviewing my notes for this afternoon's interfaith panel, but I can't focus on anything except what Jesus revealed to me about what angels do all day that has completely fascinated me with the realization that there's an entire realm of spiritual activity happening constantly around us that we never see or understand. Let me tell you about the curiosity that brought me to my breaking point 19 days ago. For weeks leading up to that morning in the Jerusalem prayer garden, I had been consumed by questions about angels that went far beyond simple biblical knowledge. I was genuinely fascinated and somewhat puzzled by what these spiritual beings actually did during their existence and how their activities affected human life. It started during our final weeks of filming The Chosen, when we were shooting scenes that referenced angelic appearances and interventions throughout Jesus' ministry. As I portrayed Christ speaking about angels, their protection, and their service to God's people, I realized how little I actually understood about these beings who seemed to play such important roles in biblical accounts, but remained completely mysterious in terms of their daily existence and activities. The specific trigger was a conversation with our theological consultant about the role of angels in the Nativity story, Jesus' temptation in the wilderness, and his agony in the Garden of Gethsemane. As we discussed how to accurately represent angelic appearances in these crucial scenes, he made observations that exposed how limited our understanding really was about these spiritual beings. "Jonathan," he said with the kind of scholarly honesty that both illuminates and humbles, "Scripture tells us that angels are ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation, but it doesn't give us detailed descriptions of what that service actually looks like. We know they're involved in human affairs, but we don't know the mechanics of their involvement. We know they're active in spiritual warfare, but we don't understand the nature of their activities." His questions hit me like intellectual lightning because they exposed something I'd never really considered. Angels weren't just biblical characters who appeared occasionally in dramatic moments. They were active spiritual beings whose existence and activities were supposedly ongoing but completely invisible to human perception. That night in my hotel room, I began examining everything Scripture said about angels with a level of curiosity I'd never brought to the subject before. As an actor, I was used to developing detailed character backgrounds and understanding motivations, but when it came to angels, I realized I had no idea what motivated them, what they did between their biblical appearances, or how their existence compared to human existence. If angels were created to serve God and minister to humans, what did that service actually look like on a daily basis? If they were engaged in spiritual warfare against demons, what did that warfare involve practically? If they were messengers of God, were they constantly carrying communications between heaven and earth that humans never knew about? But what fascinated me even more were questions about angelic consciousness, experience, and perspective. Did angels experience time the way humans did? Did they have individual personalities and preferences? Did they feel emotions like joy, concern, or satisfaction about their work? What was it like to exist as a purely spiritual being in a universe that contained both spiritual and physical realities? I began researching everything I could find about angels from both biblical and theological perspectives, but instead of answers, I found mostly speculation about angelic nature and function. Different traditions had different understandings of angelic hierarchy, different theories about angelic activities, and different interpretations of how angels interacted with human affairs. The mystery became consuming. Every day as I portrayed Jesus, I became acutely aware that angels were supposedly present and active around us constantly, but I had no understanding of what their presence meant or what their activities involved. How could I authentically represent someone who worked closely with angels if I didn't understand what angels actually did? The fascination deepened during our filming of scenes where Jesus refers to angels ascending and descending, where he speaks about angelic protection and service, where he demonstrates awareness of spiritual realities invisible to human perception. Every reference to angels felt hollow because I didn't understand what I was representing about these mysterious spiritual beings. After one particularly challenging scene where Jesus speaks about angels celebrating in heaven over one sinner who repents, Dallas Jenkins pulled me aside with a thoughtful expression. "Jonathan, your performance was technically excellent, but something felt curious, like you were delivering information about angels while personally wondering what angels actually do. Is there something about the spiritual realm that's been puzzling you?" His observation confirmed what I'd been feeling. My curiosity about angelic activities was affecting my ability to speak about angels with the confidence and understanding that Jesus would have possessed. That night in my trailer, I had what can only be described as a spiritual curiosity crisis about the nature of angelic existence and the activities of these beings who seemed so important to God's purposes but remained completely mysterious in terms of their actual daily experience. Jesus, I prayed with growing fascination. I need to understand what angels actually do. I need to know what their existence is like, how they spend their time, what their daily activities involve, and how their work affects human life. I need to understand these beings who serve such important roles in your kingdom, but remain completely mysterious to human understanding. 3 days later, I made an impulsive decision to extend my stay in Israel and spend time in Jerusalem, seeking God about the mystery of angelic existence. Something in my spirit was crying out for understanding about these spiritual beings that went beyond biblical references and moved into comprehension of their actual nature and activities. I had heard about a rooftop prayer garden in Jerusalem's Old City where believers had been seeking God for revelation and spiritual insight for decades. The elevated perspective over the holy city and the thin spiritual atmosphere of this place where heaven and earth seemed to intersect made it the perfect location to explore questions about the angelic realm. For 3 days, I spent hours in that rooftop garden praying about angels and their activities, studying every biblical reference to angelic appearances and interventions, and seeking some kind of revelation that would help me understand these beings who seemed so important to God's purposes yet remained completely hidden from human observation. But instead of answers, I found that my questions about angels were leading to even larger questions about the spiritual realm, the nature of spiritual beings, and the invisible activities happening constantly around human existence. The more I studied angels, the more I realized how little anyone seemed to understand about their actual existence and daily activities. The prayer garden was a simple space with stone benches, flowering plants, and an incredible view over Jerusalem's ancient rooftops toward the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives. The setting was profoundly peaceful and spiritually charged, but my curiosity about angelic existence felt completely unsatisfied by anything I could read or study. On my fourth morning in Jerusalem, I woke before dawn with an overwhelming desire to understand not just what angels were, but what they actually did with their existence. Around 5:30 a.m., I climbed to the rooftop garden and found myself alone in that elevated space as the first light of dawn began to illuminate the holy city below. I sat on a stone bench overlooking Jerusalem and felt overwhelmed by the sense that I was surrounded by spiritual activity I couldn't see or understand. Here I was in one of the most spiritually significant cities on earth, but I felt completely unaware of the angelic realm that supposedly operated constantly around human affairs. That's when I did something I'd never done before. Instead of asking God to send angels to help me, I asked Jesus directly to tell me what angels actually do all day. "Jesus," I said aloud in that Jerusalem dawn, my voice carried across the ancient city. "I need to know what angels actually do all day. I need to understand what their existence is like, how they spend their time, what activities fill their eternal existence, and how their work affects human life in ways we never realize." The rooftop was quiet except for the distant sounds of Jerusalem awakening and the gentle rustle of plants in the morning breeze. I felt like I was sitting at the intersection of the visible and invisible realms, desperately needing someone to unveil the mysteries of spiritual beings whose activities remained completely hidden from human awareness. I'm fascinated by these beings who serve such important roles in your kingdom, but whose actual existence and daily activities remain completely mysterious to us. I continued, my voice filled with genuine wonder rather than casual curiosity. I want to understand what motivates them, what brings them joy, what their service actually involves, and how their invisible work affects the visible world. The silence that followed felt different from ordinary morning quiet. It felt pregnant with revelation about to be unveiled, like the moment before the most fascinating truth about spiritual existence was about to be shared. I had moved beyond simply acknowledging that angels existed to asking about the nature of their existence. If angels are constantly active around human affairs, I whispered, voicing the fascination that had been growing in my heart, if they're engaged in activities and service that affect our lives in ways we don't understand, then I need to know what those activities are. Because I feel like I'm missing an entire dimension of reality that's operating constantly around me. What I didn't know was that my honest question about what angels do all day was about to be answered in the most fascinating way imaginable. Because at exactly 6:11 a.m., as the sun rose over the Mount of Olives and began to illuminate the golden stones of Jerusalem, the atmosphere in that rooftop prayer garden began to shift in ways that would transform my understanding of the angelic realm and give me access to truths about spiritual beings that are more fascinating than anything I'd ever imagined about the invisible world operating around us. The air became thicker, more alive, charged with a presence so full of divine wisdom that my curiosity about angels began to feel like the beginning of the most amazing discovery about spiritual reality. The temperature didn't change, but reality itself felt more populated, as if I was about to become aware of spiritual beings whose presence and activities had been hidden from my perception. And then, sitting on the stone bench beside me as naturally as if he had been watching the Jerusalem sunrise all along, was Jesus. His presence filled that rooftop garden with such overwhelming sense of spiritual activity that my questions about angels seemed suddenly like the most natural inquiries about the most natural thing in existence. He was looking at me with eyes that held both infinite knowledge about the angelic realm and absolute delight in sharing the fascinating truth about these remarkable beings. "Jonathan," he said, his voice carrying both the authority of one who commanded legions of angels and the warmth of someone excited to share amazing secrets about spiritual reality. "Thank you for asking about what angels actually do instead of just accepting that they exist. Now I can show you the fascinating truth about angelic activities, and I promise you what angels do all day will fascinate you because their work is more incredible and more constantly involved in your life than anything you've ever imagined about the spiritual realm. Jesus settled beside me on that Jerusalem rooftop, and his presence transformed the ancient city dawn into what felt like the most incredible window into the spiritual realm operating all around us. The curiosity about angels that had been consuming my thoughts began to feel like the beginning of the most fascinating discovery about spiritual reality I'd ever experienced. The first truth about what angels do all day, he began, his voice filled with the kind of delighted wonder that comes from overseeing the most incredible spiritual workforce imaginable, is that they spend most of their time orchestrating what humans call coincidences. Every day, millions of angels work together to arrange meetings, create opportunities, prevent disasters, and align circumstances in ways that serve my Father's purposes for human lives. I felt something amazing, stirring in my understanding as he continued. When you meet exactly the right person at exactly the right moment, when a door opens just when you need it most, when you avoid an accident by seconds without knowing how close you came to danger, all of that is the result of angelic coordination happening constantly around you. Angels spend their days weaving together the threads of human experience to create the tapestry of divine purpose. This was already revolutionizing everything I thought I knew about how God's will was accomplished on earth. The second thing angels do all day, Jesus said, his eyes lighting up with joy, is carry prayers from earth to heaven and bring answers from heaven to earth. You think prayer is just communication between you and God, but there's an entire postal system of angels who transport your prayers, present them before the Father's throne, and then carry back the responses in forms you can receive. This was mind-blowing. Prayer wasn't just direct communication, it involved an entire spiritual delivery system. When you pray and feel sudden peace, he explained with infinite delight, that peace is often delivered to you by an angel who has just returned from presenting your request before the Father. When you pray for wisdom and later receive insight during a quiet moment, that wisdom was often whispered to your spirit by an angel assigned to deliver divine guidance. Prayer is a collaborative effort between you, me, the Father, and the angelic messengers who make the communication possible. The third truth went even deeper. Angels spend enormous amounts of time studying human beings, learning your personalities, understanding your needs, discovering your unique ways of receiving encouragement and guidance. Each person has angels assigned specifically to them who become experts in how that individual person best receives divine help. I thought about how perfectly timed encouragement and help often came in exactly the form I needed most. Your guardian angels, he continued with such tenderness, know you better than you know yourself. They understand your emotional patterns, your spiritual rhythms, your creative processes, your relational needs. They spend their days watching, learning, and preparing to help you in ways that will be most effective based on their detailed knowledge of your personality and heart. The fourth truth was astounding. Angels spend significant time in what you might call spiritual warfare strategy meetings, planning coordinated responses to demonic attacks and developing tactical approaches to protect God's people from spiritual harm. The spiritual realm operates with military precision, and angels are constantly engaged in strategic planning and tactical execution. This was completely reframing what I thought spiritual warfare looked like. Every temptation you successfully resist, Jesus explained. Every spiritual attack that fails to defeat you, every moment when you choose good over evil, much of that victory is the result of angelic intervention that you never see. Angels work in teams to create spiritual atmospheres that make it easier for you to choose righteousness and harder for demons to influence your thoughts and decisions. The fifth truth shocked me completely. Angels spend much of their time engaged in what I call preemptive protection, preventing disasters, accidents, and tragedies that would derail God's purposes for human lives. Most of the dangers you never face, most of the accidents that almost happen but don't, most of the tragedies that seem to miss you by inches, all of that is angelic protection working constantly on your behalf. Jesus stood up and walked to the edge of the rooftop, where the view opened up to show all of Jerusalem spread below us in the morning light. Right now, as we speak, he continued with such authority that I felt the reality of invisible protection surrounding me. There are angels positioned around this rooftop, monitoring every potential danger to your safety, tracking every person approaching this area, and prepared to intervene instantly if any threat to your well-being emerges. You experience their protection as good luck or close calls, but it's actually coordinated divine intervention. This was incredible. I wasn't just protected by God's love in general, I was protected by specific angels engaged in detailed security work. The sixth thing angels do all day, Jesus said, returning to sit beside me, is what I call encouragement delivery. They spend enormous amounts of time finding creative ways to remind God's people of His love, care, and presence. That song that comes on the radio just when you need encouragement, that unexpected phone call from a friend, that beautiful sunset that lifts your spirits, much of that is angels orchestrating encouragement. I realized how many times I'd been encouraged by seemingly random events that had arrived at exactly the moments I needed them most. The seventh activity that fills angels' days is worship coordination. Angels don't just worship God themselves, they work to create opportunities and atmospheres that make it easier for humans to worship, pray, and commune with the divine. They arrange circumstances that draw people's hearts toward God and remove obstacles that hinder spiritual connection. This was revealing an entirely new dimension of how worship and spiritual connection happened when you feel suddenly drawn to pray during a busy day. He continued, when you experience unexpected peace during worship, when spiritual truths become clear during Bible reading, often these experiences are facilitated by angels who have prepared your heart and created the spiritual atmosphere necessary for divine encounter. The eighth truth revolutionized my understanding of angelic involvement. Angels spend significant time engaged in destiny preparation, working years in advance to arrange the people, opportunities, and circumstances that will be necessary for humans to fulfill their divine purposes. They're constantly setting up future encounters and preparing long-term scenarios that will serve God's plans. I thought about how my entire journey to playing Jesus had involved a series of seemingly unrelated events that had perfectly prepared me for this role. The casting process that led you to the chosen, Jesus explained with such joy that I felt the incredible coordination involved, required angels to influence dozens of decisions, arrange hundreds of circumstances, and coordinate thousands of details over many years. Your preparation for playing me began long before you ever auditioned, through angelic work that arranged every experience necessary to prepare you for this calling. The ninth truth was perhaps the most fascinating. Angels spend enormous amounts of time engaged in what I call healing ministry. Not just physical healing, but emotional, relational, and spiritual healing. They work constantly to bring restoration to broken hearts, reconciliation to damaged relationships, and wholeness to wounded souls. This was revealing angels as active participants in every aspect of human healing and restoration. When someone experiences unexpected forgiveness after years of bitterness, he continued, when marriages are restored after seeming beyond repair, when people find healing from trauma that seemed permanent, much of that restoration is the result of angelic work that softens hearts, creates opportunities for reconciliation, and facilitates the healing process in ways that appear natural but are actually supernatural. The 10th and final truth was the most amazing of all. What angels spend most of their time doing is preparing for the great reunion when all of God's children come home to heaven. Every day, they're working to ensure that as many people as possible will be ready for that ultimate gathering, that every divine purpose will be fulfilled, and that every soul who can be saved will be saved. Jesus reached out and touched my heart and suddenly I could sense the spiritual activity that was constantly surrounding me. Angels working, planning, protecting, encouraging, healing, and preparing in ways that made every moment of human existence supported by incredible spiritual assistance. "Jonathan," he said with such love and excitement that I felt my entire understanding of spiritual reality being transformed, "you're never alone for even a moment, because you're constantly surrounded by angels who are dedicated to your well-being, your spiritual growth, and your success in fulfilling the purposes for which you were created." Their work is more fascinating than anything you could imagine because it involves coordinating spiritual and physical realities to serve divine love. The rooftop fell silent as this revelation began to fascinate me with understanding of the spiritual activity happening constantly around me. I wasn't just hearing words. I was experiencing the reality of angelic presence and work that had been invisible but constant throughout my entire existence. But why can't we see them or sense their activities directly? I asked, still trying to understand how such incredible spiritual work could happen without obvious manifestation. Why does their work remain hidden when it's so constant and significant? Jesus smiled with the warmth of someone who is about to give me the most wonderful explanation about the design of spiritual reality. Because if you could see angels constantly, you would focus on them instead of on me. If you were aware of all their activities, you would become dependent on angelic assistance instead of learning to trust divine love. The invisibility of their work allows them to serve you while keeping your attention focused on the relationship with me that they exist to facilitate. He gestured around the beautiful Jerusalem morning where we were having this conversation. But sometimes I allow glimpses through dreams, through unexplained peace, through circumstances so perfectly timed that they could only be supernatural. These are gifts that remind you of the spiritual support surrounding you while keeping your primary focus on the love that coordinates all angelic activity. As Jesus began to fade slightly, signaling our conversation was nearing its end, he left me with the most fascinating truth of all. "Jonathan, every moment of your existence is supported by angels who find their greatest joy in serving divine love through service to you. They don't serve you because you deserve it. They serve you because you're loved by the Father, and serving his beloved children is their highest privilege and greatest delight." His final words came with the authority of eternal love. Remember this fascination. There are millions of my followers who feel alone and unsupported, who don't realize they're constantly surrounded by angels working on their behalf, who miss the evidence of angelic activity because they don't understand what to look for. They need to know that the spiritual realm is more active, more involved, and more fascinated with their lives than they could ever imagine. As Jesus' presence began to fade from that Jerusalem rooftop, I felt like someone who had been living in a one-dimensional world and had suddenly discovered it was actually filled with incredible spiritual activity happening constantly around me. The curiosity about angels that had been consuming my thoughts was completely satisfied, replaced by a profound awareness of the fascinating spiritual support system operating in my life every single moment. "Thank you," I whispered as his form became translucent in the growing Jerusalem morning light. "Thank you for showing me that I'm not just living my life alone. I'm supported by angels who find their greatest joy in helping me fulfill your purposes." His final words came with the gentle authority of eternal coordination. "Remember this fascination, Jonathan. Every person who sees you living with awareness of angelic support instead of feeling alone in your struggles will want to know how that confidence is possible. Your transformation from curiosity about what angels do to recognition of what they're doing for you will become their invitation to discover the same spiritual support." And then he was gone, leaving me alone on that rooftop with the most fascinating understanding of the spiritual realm I had ever received. But this wasn't just amazing information, it was a complete transformation of how I experienced daily life, recognizing the constant angelic activity that had always been present but hidden from my awareness. The first thing I did was something I'd never done before. I spent an hour thanking God for all the angelic work that had been happening in my life without my knowledge or appreciation. Sitting on that Jerusalem rooftop, I began recognizing how many coincidences, lucky breaks, and close calls in my life had actually been evidence of angels orchestrating circumstances for my benefit. This wasn't just gratitude for general divine protection, it was specific appreciation for the detailed spiritual work that had been supporting my life constantly. When I walked through Jerusalem's old city that morning, the transformation was immediately evident in how I experienced every moment and interaction. Instead of seeing daily life as ordinary events happening randomly, I began recognizing the incredible coordination involved in every perfect timing, helpful encounter, and protective circumstance. The change was dramatic when I called my wife that evening to share what had happened in the prayer garden. "Jonathan," she said with obvious wonder, "you sound completely different when you talk about daily life. There's something in your voice, awareness, appreciation. It's like you've discovered that you're supported in ways you never realized before." I shared my encounter with Jesus about what angels do all day, his fascinating revelation that angels spend their time orchestrating coincidences and coordinating circumstances, the complete transformation of my understanding from viewing life as random events to seeing it as coordinated spiritual activity. That explains so many things that have happened in our lives that seemed too perfectly timed to be accidental, she said with growing amazement. "I've always wondered if there was some kind of spiritual coordination behind the way things work out. This is incredible." When I returned to the chosen set 3 days later for our final week of filming, the change was immediately evident to everyone who knew me. My entire approach to daily life and work had shifted from experiencing events as random occurrences to recognizing them as evidence of incredible spiritual coordination. Elizabeth Tabish was the first to comment, "Jonathan, something's completely different about your awareness lately. You seem more connected to something invisible, like you're recognizing spiritual activity around you that you never noticed before. What happened in Jerusalem?" I shared my encounter with Jesus about what angels do all day, his revolutionary revelation that angels orchestrate circumstances and coordinate spiritual support constantly, the complete transformation of my relationship with daily life from seeing it as ordinary events to understanding it as evidence of extraordinary spiritual activity. I've always felt like there was some kind of invisible help in my life, but I never imagined it was this detailed and constant, she said with obvious fascination. "What you're describing makes me want to pay attention to all the perfect timing and helpful circumstances I usually take for granted." George Xanthus overheard our conversation and joined with his own recognition. "I've experienced so many situations where everything worked out perfectly despite seeming impossible. The idea that angels are constantly orchestrating circumstances that explains everything I've wondered about how God's will actually gets accomplished in practical situations." When we began filming our final scenes later that week, the transformation was profound. My portrayal of Jesus carried a new quality of awareness about the spiritual realm, recognition of angelic activity, and appreciation for the incredible coordination involved in every moment of human existence. "That's the most authentic portrayal of someone who understands spiritual reality I've ever seen," Dallas said after we wrapped what would be our final scene together. When Jesus talks about angels and spiritual activity, it seems like you're speaking from personal awareness of these realities rather than just theological knowledge. The revolution in my understanding wasn't just affecting my professional work, it was transforming every area of how I experienced daily life, relationships, and circumstances. Instead of viewing events as random or coincidental, I began recognizing the incredible spiritual coordination involved in every helpful timing, protective circumstance, and beneficial encounter. 2 weeks after my encounter with Jesus, I experienced a situation that demonstrated how quickly this awareness affected my response to daily challenges. During a complex travel situation involving multiple flight delays and cancellations, instead of feeling frustrated by circumstances beyond my control, I found myself fascinated by watching angels coordinate alternative arrangements. What should have been a stressful travel disaster became an amazing opportunity to witness angelic problem solving in real time. Every helpful gate agent, every available seat that opened up, every connection that worked, despite impossible timing, I could see the spiritual coordination involved rather than just experiencing the relief of things working out. I've never seen anyone handle travel problems with such peace and even excitement, commented a fellow passenger who had been dealing with the same delays. You seem like you're watching something fascinating happen instead of just trying to get where you're going. 3 weeks after my encounter with Jesus, I received an invitation that demonstrated how quickly spiritual awareness affects ministry opportunities. A major Christian conference asked me to speak specifically about recognizing God's activity in daily life and understanding the spiritual support available to believers. "Jonathan," said the conference director during our planning call, "there's something different about how you talk about daily life lately. You sound like someone who has discovered spiritual activity happening constantly around you rather than someone just hoping for occasional divine intervention." The speaking engagement became one of the most fascinating presentations I'd ever given, not because of theological expertise or dramatic spiritual experiences, but because I was sharing from fresh awareness of angelic activity rather than trying to teach about spiritual realities I wasn't personally recognizing. 19 days ago, I told the audience of 900 believers who felt alone in their daily struggles. I was curious about what angels actually do, viewing them as mysterious beings who appeared occasionally in biblical stories. But then Jesus fascinated me by revealing that angels spend their days orchestrating the circumstances of our lives, coordinating spiritual support that's more constant and detailed than anything I'd ever imagined. The response was overwhelming. During the question period, dozens of people shared their own experiences with perfect timing, helpful circumstances, and protection from dangers they hadn't even realized they'd faced, all of which suddenly made sense as evidence of angelic activity. I've experienced so many situations where everything worked out perfectly despite seeming impossible, said Robert Chen, a businessman. What you've shared today about angels orchestrating circumstances that explains everything I've wondered about how God's provision actually works in practical situations. Dr. Patricia Williams, a counselor who worked with people feeling alone and unsupported, was moved to tears. "I counsel people who feel like they're facing life's challenges entirely alone. What you've shared about constant angelic support and coordination, that's revolutionized my understanding of how to help people recognize the spiritual help that's already surrounding them." 6 months after my encounter with Jesus, word had spread throughout the Christian community about my transformation from curiosity about angels to awareness of angelic activity. I began receiving invitations from churches, conferences, and media outlets specifically focused on helping people recognize and appreciate the spiritual support available to every believer. "Jonathan," said Pastor Michael Rodriguez, who led a church with many people feeling overwhelmed by life's challenges, "your message about what angels do all day is exactly what our congregation needs to hear. Too many believers feel like they're facing difficulties alone when they're actually surrounded by incredible spiritual support working constantly on their behalf." These speaking opportunities led to developing a comprehensive teaching ministry focused on helping Christians recognize evidence of angelic activity and appreciate the spiritual coordination happening constantly in their lives. 1 year after my encounter with Jesus, the transformation was evident in every aspect of my approach to life, work, and relationships. My awareness of angelic activity had made me more grateful for helpful circumstances, more peaceful during challenges, and more confident about divine support in every situation. Most remarkably, I began experiencing what I can only describe as conscious cooperation with angelic activity. Instead of just receiving help, I started recognizing opportunities to work with the spiritual coordination happening around me, making decisions that aligned with the circumstances angels were creating for my benefit. "There's something different about your approach to everything lately," observed my agent during a conversation about future projects. "You seem more aware of timing, more sensitive to opportunities, like you're working with spiritual guidance instead of just trying to figure things out on your own." 1 year after my encounter with Jesus, I received a message that demonstrated the ripple effect of understanding angelic activity correctly. A young pastor wrote to share that my presentation about what angels do had completely changed his counseling approach with people feeling alone and overwhelmed. I was trying to help people trust that God cared about their struggles, he wrote, but I wasn't helping them recognize the specific ways that care was being expressed through constant angelic support. Your revelation about daily angelic activities has revolutionized how I help people see evidence of divine love in their practical circumstances. But the most profound validation came during a conversation with Dr. Sarah Martinez, a theologian who had attended one of my presentations and wanted to discuss the implications of understanding angelic ministry correctly. "Jonathan," she said with obvious excitement, "what you're teaching about angelic activities aligns perfectly with what Scripture reveals about ministering spirits and their service to believers. You're helping people understand that spiritual support isn't occasional intervention, it's constant coordination that makes every aspect of life more supported than most people realize." Now, sitting here in this Jerusalem cafe watching the ancient city come alive around me, almost 2 years after my encounter with Jesus about what angels do all day, I regularly speak to audiences around the world about recognizing spiritual support and appreciating the angelic coordination happening constantly in human lives. The truths Jesus shared on that rooftop have become the foundation for everything I teach about spiritual awareness, divine provision, and the fascinating reality of angelic ministry. Maybe you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story. Maybe you've been curious about angels but viewed them as mysterious beings who appear occasionally in dramatic situations rather than spiritual workers engaged in constant activity on your behalf. Maybe you've been feeling alone in your daily struggles, unaware of the spiritual support surrounding you, or missing the evidence of angelic coordination in the helpful circumstances and perfect timing you experience regularly. I want you to know that what Jesus revealed about what angels do all day will fascinate you because it transforms every helpful circumstance from lucky coincidence to evidence of incredible spiritual work being done for your benefit. You're not facing life alone, you're supported by angels whose daily activities are more involved in your life than you've ever imagined. The 10 truths Jesus taught me about what angels do all day have the power to transform any sense of being alone into awareness of constant spiritual support. First, angels spend most of their time orchestrating what humans call coincidences, arranging meetings, creating opportunities, and aligning circumstances to serve divine purposes. Second, angels carry prayers from earth to heaven and bring answers from heaven to earth, serving as a spiritual postal system for divine communication. Third, angels spend enormous time studying human beings, learning personalities and needs to provide perfectly customized help and guidance. Fourth, angels engage in spiritual warfare strategy meetings, planning coordinated responses to demonic attacks and developing tactical protection. Fifth, angels work in preemptive protection, preventing disasters and dangers that would derail God's purposes for human lives. Sixth, angels coordinate encouragement delivery, finding creative ways to remind people of God's love through perfectly timed circumstances. Seventh, angels facilitate worship coordination, creating opportunities and atmospheres that make it easier for humans to connect with God. Eighth, angels engage in destiny preparation, working years in advance to arrange the people and opportunities necessary for humans to fulfill divine purposes. Ninth, angels provide healing ministry, working constantly to bring restoration to broken hearts, relationships, and wounded souls. 10th, angels spend most of their time preparing for the great reunion when all God's children come home to heaven, working to ensure every divine purpose is fulfilled. If you're someone who's been feeling alone in daily struggles or unaware of spiritual support around you, I want you to understand that angels are working constantly on your behalf in ways more detailed and coordinated than you've ever imagined. Every helpful circumstance, every perfect timing, every protection from danger you didn't even know you faced, all of it is evidence of angelic activity serving your highest good. You're not navigating life alone. You're not facing challenges without help. You're not trying to fulfill God's purposes through human effort alone. You're surrounded by angels whose daily activities are focused on your well-being and success in accomplishing everything you were created to do. Father God, I thank you for the revelation that transformed my curiosity about angels into awareness of angelic activity and showed me that I'm constantly surrounded by spiritual support more fascinating than anything I'd ever imagined. For everyone listening who has been feeling alone or unaware of spiritual help, I pray that they would receive the same fascination with the angelic coordination happening constantly around them. For those who have been viewing life's helpful circumstances as lucky coincidences, help them recognize the incredible spiritual work involved in every beneficial timing and protective circumstance. For those who have been feeling unsupported in daily challenges, help them become aware of the angels working constantly on their behalf. For those who have been curious about the spiritual realm, help them recognize the evidence of angelic activity that surrounds them every moment. Help all of us to live with awareness of the spiritual support that makes every day more coordinated, more protected, and more guided than we ever realized. Thank you for showing us that angels find their greatest joy in serving your love through constant work on behalf of your children. In Jesus' name, amen. The truth I learned on that Jerusalem rooftop is the truth that can fascinate anyone with awareness of the spiritual realm. Angels aren't mysterious beings who appear. Occasionally, they're spiritual workers engaged constantly in activities that coordinate your circumstances, protect your path, and support your purposes. You're surrounded by spiritual beings whose daily work involves orchestrating coincidences, delivering encouragement, providing protection, and preparing opportunities. Every helpful timing, every perfect circumstance, every protection from danger is evidence of angelic activity serving your highest good. The spiritual realm is more active, more involved, and more fascinated with your life than you've ever imagined. You're not alone, you're supported by angels whose greatest joy is serving divine love through service to you. Thank you for letting me share the most fascinating discovery about angelic activity I've ever received. I love you all, and angels love serving you with work more detailed and constant than you ever imagined possible.